Before we begin today's episode, I just wanted to say a few words. As some of you might know, this is my last episode with Football Today. In 18 months, I've recorded 68 episodes and helped produce all the rest. When Josh and I started from scratch, we were very much stepping into the unknown, and looking back on the body of work we've put out, it's hard not to feel proud. 3 thanks are in order. Firstly, Josh was willing to take a chance on me and give me employment. I will always appreciate that. Secondly, my mantra has always been, a podcast is only as good as the guests they get on. If we have been good, it's because our guests have been good. Finally, you the audience. No matter how fun your job is, the feeling of having entertained listeners will never be beaten. So thank you for enjoying Football Today. Enough from me, let's get to today's episode. Back in March, the Confederation of African Football had just elected a new president, Patrice Motsepe.
It's now the big news of the day, has been the big news of the week. Mamelodi Sundowns boss, Patrice Motsepe, is officially the CAF President. His election took place in Morocco on Friday.
Given Motsepe was Gianni Infantino's candidate, it was inevitable that the President of FIFA would be there to celebrate his win.
Et aujourd'hui, c'est le symbole et la preuve de maturité ultime de ce football africain, de cette CAF.
Sure enough, a photo appeared on Twitter of Infantino with the CEO of Tanzanian club Simba SC, Barbara Gonzalez. But it was the words of the tweet that caused the stir.
It was great catching up with the FIFA President, Gianni Infantino, on the sidelines of the CAF Elections 2021. The rollout of the African Super League, with 20 permanent member clubs, is underway.
In this episode, we ask, is an African Super League realistic? And how would it impact African football?
A Super League sounds on paper like a good idea, but across Africa, many people are in love with the idea of something like the Champions League and seeing the big teams play.
Gary Al Smith is an African football expert who appears on Joy 99.7 FM and whose work can be found on the BBC, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, CNN, The New York Times and elsewhere.
So on paper, it sounds good. But as with most things, people are asking, what's in it and what are the devil in the detail?
Let's talk about the tweet that got the rumour mills turning. So just after Patrice Motsepe was elected as the head of the Confederation of African Football in March, the CEO of Tanzanian club Simba SC, Barbara Gonzalez, tweeted this. It was great catching up with FIFA President Gianni Infantino on the sidelines of the CAF Elections 2021. The rollout of the African Super League with 20 permanent member clubs is underway. We look forward to having Simba SC participate soon. How much truth do you think there is behind this tweet?
Well, that tweet was done at a meeting where she met Gianni Infantino and asked for a photograph with him. 10 minutes later, she sent out the tweets. It turns out our FIFA officials were not even aware that this was going to happen. But this is where some context is important. The idea of the African Super League was first floated in 2019 by Gianni, and nothing was mentioned from then until now. So there was no business plan. It was just him saying one of those things. I mean, anybody who has followed Gianni Infantino knows that he likes to talk from the hip sometimes, If I recall, he even mentioned that it could generate as much as $200 million in revenue. There was no evidence about that.
Let me just mention one more element for Africa. Until last year, FIFA was investing in Africa $27 million every year for the African associations. After my election, FIFA is investing in the African continent $94 million every year.
Has there been a long history behind the idea of an African Super League?
Well, the idea of an African Super League is something that has come from FIFA's quarters, definitely not from African football quarters, because anybody who has covered African football for even 6 months knows that the very unique challenges in Africa makes the idea an insane one. So if it has been mooted at all, it has always probably come from the FIFA side of things, which honestly has not been often. So I'll say that it's a fairly new concept brought on by Gianni Infantino because he is fully in support of the European version as well. I think Gianni is also testing the waters with this using Africa, where organized opposition is not as clear, it's not as assured, it's not as real a threat as it may be in Europe and Asia. Here, sometimes all you need is a bit of a lobbying, throwing a bit of money here and there, and then you can get your stuff across. In Europe, that may not happen because there are issues of sovereignty. Integrity checks in Europe are a bit more, rigorous than, let's say, in Africa.
How much is known about the proposed format for the African Super League then? Barbara Gonzalez mentioned that there's going to be 20 permanent member clubs, but is there any more firm information about it?
No, there isn't much information, and that's what makes it even intriguing. So we know that in principle, they wanted about 20 clubs to be in there. And then the cost of admittance will be, drumroll, $20 million per season for 5 seasons. $20 million for 5 seasons. I mean, this is Africa. This is big, big money. There are many teams across the continent that honestly cannot think of $1 million in the financial outlay for a year. If there are any teams that can do this, there aren't a great many. So that is what I know about the formats, how it will work, whether they are going to play it in one location. Obviously, unfortunately, I do not know. If he wants to use Africa as a springboard or a guinea pig, that may work. But at very least, show some respect to the people who you want to work with and tell them about it. Because as we speak now, most African football administrators don't have a clue as to what it will be about. And that is him losing the game even before the whistle has gone off for the start of the match.
So previously, Gianni Infantino has claimed that the African Super League would generate $200 million of revenue. A lot of African journalists have questioned this figure. Where do you stand on the profitability of the African Super League? Do you think that these ideas are realistic, or is this, again, Infantino shooting from the hip, as it were?
I don't think that there was much consultation about this, to be honest. For a tournament like this, African football history and finances and current form suggest that just a couple of teams will be. Obviously, North Africa and Southern Africa. Northern Africa being teams like Zamalek, Al Ahly, the Egyptian Giants. You go to Morocco, there will be Raja, Wydad, there will be Esperance, Etoile. So those are from Tunisia. Then you come to South Africa, Orlando Pirates, Kaizer Chiefs, because they are big on marketing and all that. Patrice Motsepe's own club, Mamelodi Sundowns, because they have quite a bit of money. They are currently going for their 4th league trophy in a row as we speak. So these are a couple of teams. Then you come to the historic clubs of the African football scene. So you are talking countries from Ghana, Asante Kotoko, and Heart of Oak, both of whom have history. Then you come to Nigeria, where you have Enyimba. And then you go to Central Africa-ish. TP Mazembe is always a big name in African football. Recently, Simba have been doing great things as well. Throw in a team or two from Cameroon, Senegal, Ivory Coast, and then it's looking like a package. But that is you just reeling off names. When it comes to the actual money for these teams to put into the league, that is where the question will be. So $200 million, I have no idea how Gianni intends to make money from it, unfortunately.
Obviously, the fact that there are only 20 permanent clubs in the Super League proposition presents something of a problem. There are 56 federations within CAF, so even if you limited the entrance to a Super League to 1 per country, you're still going to be excluding 36 federations. So how do you think the fact that an African Super League would be an exclusive bunch of clubs, do you think that would be an issue?
Yes, it will be an issue. It will be. The dynamics of African football are different from, let's say, Europe. Even when teams don't have money, they always will threaten you with things like, we are not going to vote for you in the next election. When the FIFA cancelled elections come, we are not going to get support from us, and the usual politicking that you would expect. So if you put 20 teams together, what would it mean, for example, for existing competitions like the African Champions League and then the CAF Confederations Cup, which are the equivalent of the European Champions League and then the Europa League? Most of the time, it is these big nations, these 20 teams, that usually do well in the CAF Champions League and then the CAF Confederations Cup. So if you have them in the African Super League, is it going to be a case of if they are putting $20 million over 5 seasons here, then it wouldn't make any sense to continue playing in the CAF Champions League and the CAF Confederations Cup, which is going to bring serious problems to those existing competitions. And I don't see that politically being something the other 36 countries or so are going to smile about.
There's also a broader geographical problem here as well. If you limit places to 20 clubs, you're going to end up prioritising the areas of African football that are already thriving and probably unfairly feed revenue into those areas and away from federations where the game needs to develop. So how do you think that would look in practice?
Every area of African football is going to suffer. Every area. Because even where, and I have listed in the previous question, about 12 to 15 teams that would, in theory, say that, oh, we are interested in this idea because we have the money and the schedule and whatever to do it. But even in those countries, those teams are in the top 1% or 10% that they are able to afford all these stuff. The rest of the 80% of teams in these individual countries simply cannot hold a candle to these teams we are talking about. For example, Al Ahly and Zamalek. If you take those two out, and then recently there's a team that is called the Pyramids that was invested in by a billionaire. So let's just say 3 teams in Egypt are going to do it from an Egyptian Premier League of whatever number of teams. What are the other teams going to do and say? So that's just in Egypt, and then you can replicate that for the rest of North Africa, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, where 2 or 3 teams, let's just say theoretically, and that's not even cast in stone, can do it. The rest of Africa may have the same similar idea, and that is where the opposition is going to come in. So it's not just that one area of Africa is going to benefit. It is certain teams are going to benefit, even to the chagrin of other teams in their same geographical areas and countries, which makes it moot from the very beginning, I guess.
There's also a logistic problem here as well, isn't there? Last month's journalist Maher Mazahi told Forbes that some CAF Champions League preliminary rounds can cost up to $50,000 in airfare alone. This, along with the comparatively small prize pot, has made the CAF Champions League unprofitable even for the top clubs. How difficult would some of these logistical problems prove to be for a Super League?
Other arguments that we have yet to mention, such as, what are you going to do to the existing calendar? I mean, post-COVID, every football competition in the world is packed. Everybody's racing to finish on time before qualifiers are done for, in our case, the Africa Cup of Nations, which is just in January. June, there are going to be World Cup qualifiers. In November, there's going to be qualifiers for something else. How are you going to fit all these in? That is one thing. And then there's the weather. Certain parts of Africa are known geographically to be experiencing rainy seasons at some point. The north of Africa, certain countries in the north of Africa can have the sun all year round and little rain. So they might, in theory, have 365 days where they can put these games at any time. But that's not the case for elsewhere across the continent. There's also transport and infrastructure. Air travel is notoriously difficult around here. Expensive, laborious, and then very circuitous, So how are you going to fit all that in? These are questions that will all come together to make it very, very difficult. And it's the reason why, for starters, I think that Gianni Infantino should have, at the very least, engaged stakeholders and talk about it, rather than sitting there and saying we are going to do this, when most people I've spoken to, even in preparing for this show, don't seem to have the faintest idea. Because in COVID times, clubs are not even able to function as well as they could pre-COVID. And when I say they couldn't even function as well, I'm being charitable, because most clubs all across the world are feeling the pinch of the financial times that we live in, even pre-COVID.
I'm interested in how the fans of African football feel about this prospect of a Super League.
I don't think many people are smiling, because short of giving them money to say that we are going to compensate you for the lack of competitiveness that will happen should this Super League happen, which would then mean that these teams in the Super League may not take part in what will be the African Champions League and the CAF Confederations Cup. I don't see how they are going to be happy about it. In every country, such as, let's say, England, the teams in the traditionally bottom 10 look to play the top 6 pre-COVID times to have a better financial outlay when it comes to match revenue. Because when Manchester United comes to Burnley, they expect to make some money because people are going to come. When Manchester United comes to Stoke, if they are in the Premier League, Stoke will expect to make money. So if you have taken Manchester United and Liverpool and Chelsea and Arsenal from the league, denying these other teams the opportunity to have home and away, whatever, so that they can make some money, then you probably want to compensate them. And that will be the example that I think African teams that are not in the competition will want to make. Give us money and we may be happy. But it's not just money. For sporting reasons as well. What happens to the integrity of the other former high-profile competitions? Politics in Africa may be more dangerous and more intertwined with football than probably in Europe, because a lot of teams in Africa, especially the top teams, are connected in one form politically to the state or the government of the day or whatever it is. And so it's going to take some real convincing to get this done.
So in the long run then, would you say an African Super League would be good or bad for football in Africa?
There's a suspicion about this idea from Gianni that he wants simply to create a club competition that can be as good or as solid as the Champions League. That is what he wants to do. But there's so much of a huge historical chasm, disparity, space between the Champions League and then whatever it is that he wants to do that is going to be difficult and will take a lot of money that frankly is not available. So I am just stopping short of saying that it's a silly idea, because never say never when it comes to football people. They've agreed to crazier things in the past when money is involved. And so all I'll say is that they should go to the drawing board, think about it more thoroughly, and never forget that football is about the people. It's not really only about the money.
But it's not only Africa that is being haunted by the spectre of the Super League. Around the world, ideas about cross-border leagues are being mooted as associations look to cash in on modern football's purported riches. To find out more, I spoke to Matt Slater of The Athletic.
People have been talking about Super Leagues, cross-border leagues, merged leagues for years. Any British fan will know the stories about Celtic and Rangers either playing in England or playing in some kind of Atlantic League. People might remember the story of Wimbledon perhaps moving to Dublin. And of course, we have Welsh teams in the English Pyramid and other examples. In some sense, it's not a new conversation. I guess what's different is that there is more talk right now about cross-border leagues, merged leagues, super leagues. And I think it's very possible that at least 1, 2, 3, and who knows what happens next, might actually come to pass. So not a new conversation. In fact, I think I found an early reference to a European Super League in a famous book, Arthur Hopcroft's book called The Football Man, which he wrote in the 60s, late 60s. He talks about something that sounds an awful lot like a European Super League.
You recently wrote a piece looking at cross-border leagues in football. Obviously, in the last few months, there's been talk of combined leagues between Mexico and the US, between Belgium and the Netherlands, and across Ireland as well. Are we seeing some form of globalisation taking place in football then?
I think the thing that perhaps links all of those is it's almost a sort of recognition that the status quo isn't quite working, and that globalisation has led to enormous polarisation and a decline in competitive balance at home in domestic leagues. And some of that is just to do with TV technology and this idea, you see this in publishing or films or music or whatever, where you have a few winners at the top who do fabulously well, and then you have this long tail. And that rush to be at the top is really, really hard. So if you just sort of look at European football, you've got the 5 big leagues and they're the 5 big markets. They also have kind of famous clubs in them, brands. Power of the brand is really important. So they had kind of natural advantages anyway. They were always going to be big just because of the size of the population and the TV deal and the support that some of their big clubs had. But then added to that, and I think this is the thing that perhaps people didn't realise was happening at the time, but now look back and go, oh my word, yeah, that really was significant, was Champions League money. Now, the Champions League, of course, is perhaps the closest thing we've got to a European Super League. I mean, it does look and feel a lot like it sometimes. And I think the way that tournament is evolving could well become a European Super League for all intents and purposes. But the money that's generated for those clubs that get to play in it year in, year out, and it has a compounding effect, has taken them away from the field. That is why you can see all around Europe these dynasties that have formed. You know, they were big clubs before. Most of them were big clubs before, and that's often an argument. Oh, what? There's nothing new here. Big clubs are big, medium-sized clubs are medium-sized, and little clubs are little clubs. What's so different about this? What's different is that those clubs have massive inbuilt compounding advantages by qualifying for your Champions League, and that is why they win 7, 8, 9 titles in a row. So a lot of the Super League, a lot of the merged, a lot of the cross-border league conversation is driven by we are being demolished here. We are no longer competitive. So what do we do? How do we make our market bigger? How do we become more relevant? So in some ways, it's a reaction. It's a defensive reaction.
These are all powerful clubs, all powerful entities that I think in many ways have outgrown the leagues that they participate in. They've outgrown the countries in which they're located. And what they're seeking to do is commercially, financially, is to capitalise upon this powerful position that they now occupy.
You mentioned money being the driver here. We've seen that Gianni Infantino's claimed that there's $200 million of revenue available from an African Super League. The Beneliga revenue is being touted at around £350 million. Do you think these claims are realistic, or do you think it's just wishful thinking as these clubs are attempting to try and bite back in the market, as you said?
Well, it's a good question, and it's one of those ones where you don't really know until you try. Both those numbers will be based on a consultant report and maybe some conversations with broadcasters and a bit of guesswork. You know, you look at the existing TV deals. So I think the African one is pure guesswork. So I'm going to leave that one aside. He's presumably paid someone good money to go try and cobble that together. Who knows? The Belgium-Netherlands one, I can speak a bit more about because, I mean, first of all, that report was done by Deloitte. There's been various iterations of it. And we actually have an example as well. We have a concrete example. The Belgium and Netherlands Women's Leagues merged a few years ago, and they played for about 2 or 3 seasons. It wasn't a particularly happy marriage, though. In the end, it was dominated by the Netherlands, the bigger country, and they've gone back to their separate ways. So what they're doing there is they're basically taking a country of, you know, I'm generalizing here, of about 10 million, and they're taking another one of about 20 million and creating a market of about 30 million, which is relatively getting closer to Spain. If you look at sort of the quality of the sides and their sort of club coefficients, so basically how they perform in Europe, not that dissimilar to France. You know, if you look at the French league, it's sort of PSG, Lyon, and there's a bit of a gap. So you could start to sort of think, well, hold on a minute. We are building definitely a sort of 6th best league. Could it be a 5th best league? Maybe. You know, Club Brugge, Ajax, you know, there's enough good names there. You look at their existing TV deals. Well, actually, the Belgian TV deal's not bad for a country of its size. Again, they're pretty similar. So they're about 100 million each. But then they're effectively doubling it, aren't they? That's the point. They're sort of saying, okay, if you put our 2 deals together and we create something a bit sexier where it's PSV and Feyenoord and Bruges and Anderlecht, and we sort of get rid of the kind of 10 worst teams in your league, 10 worst teams in my league, and make something cool and sexy, could we double it if we're together? Maybe. And of course, then you can add commercial deals and what have you, presumably bigger gates as well. Though, you know, the stadiums are pretty full in both those countries. So it's nearly always about the TV deal. And this idea of if we create bigger, sexier fixtures, broadcasters will pay more. Maybe.
So I suppose the question at root becomes this. If these revenue streams are reliant on audience share at the very base level for their value, where is this influx of viewers coming from? Is the plan just for larger markets to compete against other larger markets, or is the thinking that you can develop some kind of economy of scale here?
It's just size, isn't it? So they would be thinking that a merged Dutch-Belgian league or Mexican-US league would create bigger, sexier games that more people will watch, and therefore broadcasters will pay more for them, be they free to air because they'll get more money from advertising, or behind a paywall, or some sort of mixture of the two. So if we look at US Mexico, that's another good example of this. Mexico has a football culture, much like Europe. The football business there is arranged in a very sort of European way. Of course, North American MLS isn't. It's very different. So there are already going to be complexities about how you put those two leagues together if you were to do that. What they do know is that the MLS TV deal isn't very good. In fact, it's pretty poor, to be honest, for a sport that likes to think of itself as this sort of sport of the future. And the clubs seem to think of themselves as like tech stocks, huge multiples of their earnings for their valuation. So very much a sport of the future, but their TV deal is really poor. And what they know is the best audiences they get are when they play Mexican teams, be it in the CONCACAF Champions League, or they've got a couple of friendly tournaments they've just started now. So they are exploring this already. So you have almost sort of like a business case that's just staring them in the face. Hispanic population in North America is booming. They like soccer. We have Mexico, who has this vibrant, passionate football culture. The clubs are not particularly well resourced. They're not always particularly well run. We're good at that. So Americans are good at that. Already a cross-border league, let's be honest, America and Canada. Could we make it a NAFTA-style league? We're hosting a joint World Cup in 2026. So there are lots of reasons we can do this. And we know that when an American team plays a Mexican team in a CONCACAF Champions League game or a friendly, that's our best ever audience. So we know people are watching. So there is the evidence that a merged league would do well. Broadcasters would pay for this. Now, all the other stuff is really, really complicated. So that's a sort of slightly different one for me with Belgium and Netherlands, or all the other putative merged leagues around the world, where you're sort of taking a bit of a guess on this multiplying effect of merging your league and how appealing you'd be to a broadcaster. I think MLS clubs, no, it would work. Broadcasters would go for this and people would watch it.
How likely then do you think that these cross-border leagues actually are?
Again, a really good question. And I think it's sort of, there isn't a stock answer. I think Belgium and Netherlands makes a lot of sense. The two countries are pretty closely aligned anyway. You're not talking ridiculous geographic distances, so you wouldn't lose fans. I mean, it's always difficult to put sort of two things together that aren't the same size. So whilst Belgium is really good at football, number one FIFA ranked nation in the world, has good teams, and its league's pretty good. Its league's pretty balanced from top to bottom. Netherlands is a bigger country, has 5 or 6 big teams, but its league is a bit unbalanced. We've already got the example of the Women's League where the Netherlands, the Dutch teams sort of kind of ended up being better. There are some issues there. I mean, the big issue with any European merged league will always, I think, come down to what they call European tickets, so berths into European club competitions. So again, if we just take the Belgium and Netherlands example, we could pick others, Scandinavia, Balkans, there's all sorts of other leagues that are being whispered and talked about. But if we look at Belgium and Netherlands, at the moment they get 5 European places each. So you put them together, they're going to get 10? No, of course they're not going to get 10 because the Premier League only gets 7. Bundesliga only gets 7. So they would have to take a haircut, so to speak, probably 6. Well, then you're asking, it's a bit kind of like turkeys for Christmas type situation. You're saying to teams in both leagues that might have been thinking European Conference League or Europa League, no, you might not get into Europe. You're also saying to big teams who kind of assume that every year, well, if you have an off year, you're not going to get into Europe. So how do you make that right? Well, you say, well, don't worry about it because the merged league is going to be worth 400 million euros. So you'll be all right. But that's a bit of an assumption, isn't it? Now, if you look at the US and Mexico, I think those sort of financial assumptions are fine. The problem is the way MLS is structured and the way Mexican football is structured, like ours, private companies, blah, blah, blah. All right, we get that. MLS, the league owns effectively, runs everything. It's essentially run league with no promotion or relegation. You buy your way in, massive valuations to buy in. So some of these guys that have just bought in recently, and the league is still expanding as well, are paying $300 million, $350 million to buy their way into a league, to buy a loss-making team, with the idea being they're all going to make money in 2030, 2040, 2050. Putting those two leagues together is going to be hard, just hard.
It's science fiction, complete science fiction. Did you watch Blade Runner? A lot of what's there was science fiction, but then it's happened. UEFA have got a real hold in the situation right now, but they feel threatened.
The highest profile Super League that is always garnering news coverage is the European Super League. I'm interested in whether or not you think if one of these smaller Super League fails before we see the formation of a European Super League, do you think that'll prevent that league from forming? Or is the European Super League big enough to gravitate all the revenue away from localised leagues anyway and towards itself, so it maybe won't worry too much about these smaller Super Leagues that could form?
I'd be inclined to go with the latter, I think. The rationale of the European Super League is just sort of, well, who cares what anyone else is doing? We are effectively taking our ball and going and performing our own game. So yeah, by all means, if Belgium and Netherlands want to form some sort of second tier thing, or Atlantic leagues, or any other leagues, right? Because we are going to be the 15 biggest clubs in the world, and we're going to invite 5 or 6 of the others who are like-minded and we think are sort of worthy of playing us. If that was to happen, it would be done with a degree of confidence that whatever else happens in the world doesn't really matter, that we are taking our fan bases and we're putting them together and we're going to make the most compelling, the premium football product. Now, there are loads of assumptions there being made that I think are deeply problematic, and I think will, certainly for the foreseeable future, make enough of those clubs pause and worry and think, we're giving up a lot here. It's a leap of faith. We're going to lose a lot of people on the way, a lot of goodwill. We've got pretty good things going already at home, particularly if we add the rocket fuel of continuing participation in UEFA club competitions, which we are shaping anyway with our threat to form a Super League. So do we need to actually form a Super League when UEFA keep giving us what we want? So that, I think, is the big conversation around the European Super League. Let's just say that they completely fell out with UEFA and thought, no, we're going to do it our own way, and Spanish giants don't need a Liga anymore, and the big six in England don't need Premier League anymore, and they go for it. The fact that a Benelux type league or a Balkans league might struggle to get off the ground, I don't think will worry them too much.
Let's go back to the article that you wrote on cross-border leagues. You started that article talking about localism versus globalism. Obviously, globalism allows you to maximise revenues, but what do you think is lost by prioritising globalism over localism within football?
This is one of the big cons, if you like, or the negatives, or the concerns or worries. You know, if I was a chief exec of one of these big elite clubs, this would worry me. I mean, yeah, I totally understand now that they are global brands, and when they look at other global brands that appear to have fewer customers or fewer fans, you know, why are we so undervalued? Man United, with however many 100 million fans they say they have, they look at their market capitalisation and go, right, well, how comes all these tech stocks like TikTok and what have you are worth way more than us, and we've got more fans? They get annoyed by that, and they sort of think the market's undervaluing us. And that is what is driving this interest from a lot of American investment, private equity. They're looking at that, and there's a lot of sort of, as I said, confidence there about the future, and is what's holding us back the structure, if you like, of old-fashioned football. And we are global brands now. And yeah, it's great that our stadium's full and we've got this sort of passionate support at home, but we're trying to reach people in the West Coast of the States and the Far East and everywhere in between. And we've got to work out a way of monetizing those fans who appear to love us as much as our fans in Manchester and Liverpool and North London and everywhere else. That is what's driving this sort of sense that they've outgrown their domestic leagues. They've outgrown their domestic markets. I understand that. Everyone understands that. And it's a conundrum for them to sort out. But let's not forget who actually is paying at the moment. For nearly all of these clubs, the people that are buying the shirts are local people. The people that are buying the real stuff, not counterfeit stuff, are local people, are people that can go to recognised club shops. People that are buying tickets, season tickets. The people that are paying for TV subscriptions. Those are their customers. And what really drives that business is what I referred to in my piece as my town versus your town. The conversation on Monday morning when you go to the office or when you're watching a game and you're talking to your mates on a WhatsApp group, it's because my team have beaten your team. Now, that becomes quite hard if you're playing in a European Super League and it's Arsenal versus Roma. How many WhatsApp groups, are you in with people from Rome? Who are you going to see on Monday morning where you can gloat? The people we see in the office on Monday are not from Rome, they're from round the corner. That's what you lose.
You can find Gary Alsmith on Joy 99.7 FM. Matt Slater is a football news reporter at The Athletic. The music for this episode is provided under the Creative Commons license by Blue Dot Sessions, and the details for the individual songs can be found in the show notes. This episode was produced by myself and Josh Schneiderweiler. I'm John Mackenzie. Thanks for listening to Football Today.